really, unless you do it yourself, you'll never know who you should hire. I did all of the wrong things when it comes to like starting a company from scratch. And what you
Right.
should be doing from day one or day zero or day -1 is selling and finding a customer that's willing to pay you. Hey,
Hi, how you doing?
good. How's it going?
Good. Well, yeah, I'm excited to dive in, and
Same.
especially with your background. I think just to give you a little context, I'm in month 5 of setting up Stacklist as a startup, and I love the idea of 0 to 1. I think what's interesting is the path between 0 and 1 is the sort of like, okay, great. What's my benchmark that I feel like I'm in a good place? I mean, obviously there's always fundraising and there's always growing and there's always challenges, but sort of when that period happens when you're like, okay, I can take a breath for a minute. I see where things are going. This feels stable enough that I'm not going to fall off a cliff anytime soon. And so really it's about diving into sort of the early. I'd love to hear your background. It's such interesting things that I found in your journey, but also really early Smarty, sort of from idea inception, and moving forward. So
Amazing. I agree. 0
that
to
sounds
1
good.
is fascinating. It's so different for everyone. And I'm excited to dive in. I've been thinking a lot about
Yeah.
that as well.
So I think what's interesting, speaking of Smarty, I read somewhere that you started coding when you were 8.
I did.
That's amazing. Tell me about that.
Are we already in the podcast?
Yeah, we're diving in.
Okay,
She-
perfect. Yeah. I was lucky enough to go to a school where they taught Logo when I was in 3rd grade, and Logo is this like programming language for kids. It has like a little turtle, and you teach it to like move in puzzles or make a snowflake. And I fell in love instantly. I knew it was different than like other kids in my class because I was the one that was like looking forward to that class. I couldn't like wait to like go and like code some more things. And that passion just like started really early. And I remember coming home and being like, I think I want to be a software engineer. I think this is like really cool.
That's amazing. I love that. And even at that point, even being young, is it sort of, without being able to describe it, I'm sure at that age, is it kind of like you felt like you could see the Matrix a little bit, or you could see sort of like, what was it that sort of attracted you to the ability to sort of create and develop?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And now that I think back on it, I think it's really the logic. Like it was so clear. Like if you tell the turtle to do this, then it will do that. And
Right.
it's like a puzzle too. It's like, okay, I'm trying to make this happen, and these are the constraints that I'm working in. What can I do? I think I just loved figuring that out and deducing like this is the algorithm or this is the process. And every time I learned something new, like, oh, this is a for loop or this is how recursion works, I was like, oh wow, look at all these cool things that you can do with just like a few lines of text.
Yeah. Amazing. I remember a similar period when mine was a little bit later, but I think it was like 14 or 15, but I bought a laptop from a kid down the street, and it was an 8086 luggable, like a green screen that was like this big, and 2 5 1/4 floppies, and just like messing with it and getting it to do stuff. And then I remember, fast forward a little bit later, about reading email on like a bulletin board service, and this idea that you could just like send a message to someone across the world and they would get it instantly. I remember coming down and telling my mom this. I'm like, there's this thing, you can write a message and it goes all the way across the world, and it's like instant and it's free, and that they can write you back. And my mom was like, that sounds great. Like, sit down for dinner. Like,
Yeah.
kind of,
I know. I think
and then fast forward like a bunch of years later where she's like, can you help me figure out my email? Like, I so can, so.
Totally. I feel like there was a period where people didn't realize like how big of a deal it was, like the internet and this just instant communication.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I love your like. I look through your journey coming through, and TLDR, but like program manager intern at Microsoft. That's amazing. How did you get that sort of out of the gate?
Yeah, so being a program manager at Microsoft is the same as being in product, like at anywhere else. They just call it program manager. And
Okay.
got that internship my sophomore year in college, which was at the time like a really big deal for me. I remember going to a career fair and just talking up the recruiters about things that I was passionate about and what I was working on, and it really made a difference. I'm pretty sure that's why I got selected to like even interview for the internship. And it was my first time really interviewing for a job. I came into college still semi thinking like maybe biotech was where I wanted to go, or maybe something else. Like I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. And that internship at Microsoft really like opened my eyes to like what's possible in tech and what are you building. And that was my first real like experience working at a corporate company, having like 9 to 5 hours, having like a manager, and really just
Yeah.
using both my strategic and creative skills and like developing those product sense while also kind of being very technical at the same time. And so it was an amazing experience. I really loved it. But when I was in college, I was really confused about what I wanted to do next or what I wanted to do in my career. And so I didn't, even though I got a return offer, I didn't end up going back to Microsoft. I ended up trying like a law internship and a finance internship and so many things. Like I was very like open to the possibilities of the world.
Nice. Is that a bit of how your personality is when you think about like, do you dive deep on one thing, or do you like exploring lots of different things outside of career, just how you kind of learn and explore?
I think I'm more of a generalist, which is so funny because right now I think there's been a lot of pushback around like with generative AI and with AI in general, like, is there a place for generalists in the world? And there's been a lot of pushback from the other side being like, well, actually, this is the time for generalists to really thrive because there's so much you need to apply from different areas to make any one industry succeed. And I think that being a generalist is probably really great for founder CEOs specifically because you have to be consuming all of the fire hose of knowledge that's out there and trying to make sense of it and trying to productize it and systemize it in a way that matters to your industry, to your niche. And I would definitely say I'm a generalist. I like to dabble in a lot of different things. As I said, like I tried out a lot of different careers because I have a lot of passions and curiosities. And I can go deep when it's necessary, but I prefer things that really require more of that out of box thinking.
Yeah. No, I agree. I love being a general, hyper generalist. I love trying everything. Even as a kid, I was like, people would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'm like, I want to be a detective and an inventor and a sniper. And I just start
That's
like
awesome.
listing off
Yeah.
all these things because I just wanted like many lives. And I think what's interesting to your point, while I know there was definitely a period where it was like, you can't be a generalist. No one's going to everyone wants specialists. You got to go deep on something. But what I think is interesting is that generalist kind of lifestyle and learning mindset sets you up for founder and especially CEO, especially early on, to be able to like, I can jump in Figma and do something, and I can jump in and code something, and I can also talk marketing, and I can also like run social for a little bit versus needing help in all of those different areas.
I think that's exactly it. Like as a founder and especially as CEO, you really at a 0 to 1 at the zero stage, you have to do everything. Sometimes you're the only
Yeah.
one on the team. So you
Right.
have to be the one to try something first before you can hire for it. And I think that's like a piece of advice that a lot of founders kind of use as a pitfall. Like they start outsourcing too early or they start hiring too early. And really, unless you do it yourself, you'll never know who you should hire.
Right. Now, what so amazing, you also like adjunct professor, like going from the Microsoft intern. Obviously there was a period there at JP Morgan, but like going, what was the jump to professor?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So as I was saying, like I tried a bunch of different careers. I would say like professor was one of them, or lecturer as well. I was at Microsoft. I was started as a PM on PowerPoint. I liked it, but I felt like I wasn't technical enough. I wasn't coding enough. I kind of missed it. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll start trying to teach computer science to get some of that coding, I don't know, energy back in my life. And
Mm-hmm.
I started teaching a Java 101 class at a community college, like near work. So I could go after work and just go teach the class and then head home after. And then that went well. So then I started like escalating from there. And so I decided to like start being an adjunct professor at San Francisco State. And I think I taught like Algorithms 101. And that was a lot of fun. Like that was an in-person class that I would like really enjoy teaching. It was a lot closer to where I lived because I lived in SF. And that was going well. So then I was like, oh, let me try a virtual course. And I realized teaching virtually, especially if this was back in like 2015, is
Yeah.
so different than teaching virtually today. It was just so much work. It was like not as fun. It's not as engaging because you're not like interacting with the students. And so I decided then like, okay, I tried it. It's cool. In that same time period, I ended up switching my professional career. I switched from being a PM at PowerPoint to being a software engineer at Yammer, still at Microsoft. So then I was getting coding in my like actual like work life as well. And so I was like, okay, I think I have to stop teaching on the side. But that was really just for fun, and it was for me to like give back to my community.
Nice. I love that. If you jump, so all of the pieces that led career-wise up to, let's come to Smarty -1,
Yeah.
Smarty 0. What was that like? Do you remember that initial sort of ideation idea? What was the spark or the initial inspiration for sort of starting or exploring down a path that led to Smarty?
Yeah, it's funny that we're like going in these chapters because like right then, like after I switched to being a software engineer at Yammer, I realized that I still wasn't feeling really fulfilled with the work that I was doing on a day-to-day basis, and I was missing something and I still wanted more. So I ended up deciding that I wanted to go to business school. And I when I was at business school, I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll pivot, I'll move out of tech. Like I was very open to all of the careers. And I
Yeah.
got there and I realized like I actually don't want any of these other career options. I don't want to go into consulting. I don't want to go into finance. I'd already tried both of those careers before. And then the really like only other option left that's big is like operations or CPG or marketing. And I was like, I don't want to like
Hmm.
do any of those things either. Like I'm good at tech. I like tech. But then I didn't want to like immediately jump back to like going back to Microsoft after business school. So I really had this existential moment where I was like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And I have to decide now. I've like waited too long to like try to figure
Right.
it out. And I really thought about like what is my vision for the future and what I think software or technology is going to look like 30 years from now, 40 years from now, and kind of reverse engineered into that first initial idea of Smarty. So I believed at that time, and I still believe today, that we're all going to have this conversational web operating system, just a single interface that we're conversing with that understands our needs and is able to do things on our behalf at like representing our true needs and interests and desires. And so kind of started with that vision, which I still think is true, and reverse engineered into a conversational productivity operating system. So anything like really focused around everything you do for work around like email or calendar, just all of your productivity tasks, same sort of conversational interface. And this is like way back in 2017, 2018, way before ChatGPT. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
like taking that vision, reverse engineered into this like subvision, and then okay, how do I reverse engineer into a product today that is monetizable, scalable, that lets me control like what sort of data we're collecting? And that's how I came up with Smarty. And it really started off as a chatbot where you were telling it things to do to help you like keep track of your tasks or automate things. And it was like, okay, this is what I want. I want an AI extension of myself. I think this is like a type of product that let me connect the right types of data. I think I know how to start a startup. Let me dive right into this idea. And that's how I started off with Smarty. Looking back now, it's like so funny. Like I did all of the wrong things when it comes to like starting a company from scratch. And
That's great.
it's funny to think about now, but it was very devastating at the time because like nothing was working the way I wanted it to work. And this was all pre ChatGPT. So it was also like the tech wasn't there. The vision that I was selling it to investors, and the appetite for it wasn't there either because they were like, this is not happening anytime soon. And it's so funny because I still sell the same vision in pitches today, but like the appetite for it is just night and day.
I can just see that. I remember that very specific period late last year when ChatGPT started to become a word that people started saying. And I can almost imagine you going, "Ha, see, I told you, like it's here, like it's fine, like we've caught up." And so interesting too, I think from a founder perspective, before we sort of dive into that like zero initial state of Smarty, it's so interesting to be, and I imagine in your head, to be that early, a couple of years before that moment, and to have those conversations where you're like, I'm telling you, this is coming. This is the way it's going to be. And everyone goes, no, I mean, maybe, whatever. And do, do you feel like it's one of those things? Did you have periods in there of doubt, or was it one of those things that you it was so ingrained and you just saw the future so clearly that you were like, you don't get it. It's fine. Moving on. Next.
I wish I had that level of confidence. Even now, I definitely don't. Back then, I would say that was definitely like the worst existential period of my life because I was at school. I was spending so much money to be at business school. And I
Right.
didn't want to go back to the same job that I had before, even though that was such a great job. And like now I look back on it sometimes and I'm like, oh, like nice hours, nice pay. But I really like wanted to convince people, like agree with me, like validate me, like I know this is true and I want you to know it's true as well. So I spent a lot of time trying to convince other people, and I was trying to find believers in the idea instead of finding believers in me or partners for a venture. And that's what your
Right.
investors are. They're your stakeholders, they're your partners, and they don't have to believe in that exact idea necessarily. They just need to believe in your potential at that early stage to build something that will make money, that will last, and that can be a thriving business in the future. And so I've learned a lot over the years since then around like how do you start at the early stage? What should you focus on? What are those pitfalls? And I'm happy to dive into that.
Yeah, totally. I would love to know that if you remember that that turning point, that moment when you sort of either was it an early POC or was it an early sort of it's the back of napkin in the coffee shop or whatever. Like, did you have one of those moments that was sort of like the light goes on, you go like, okay, this is the path I'm taking, or was it a bit of a slow, gradual, and then you're looking back going, oh, I've been on this path for a minute. I think I'm gonna keep going on it.
It's funny. So I started thinking about Smarty as an idea while I was at business school. But then after business school, I ended up doing a fellowship and I did a bunch of other things. But I kept working on Smarty on the side. And then eventually I convinced one of the first investors I'd ever talked to a year and a half or a year later to give me money. And nothing much had changed about the vision. I think it was just my like grit and determination. And I did have a proof of concept at that time already that I'd been building out. It was a chatbot. It was bad. It was like definitely not what the product needed to be. A chatbot was definitely not the right experience. It was not serving any users in like a retaining way. But it was that first check that allowed me to quit everything else I was doing and just work on Smarty full time. And that was the validation that I needed. And I wasn't going to quit and work on Smarty full time until I had that. But I also wasn't pursuing any jobs like in tech that would conflict with me working on Smarty. And so it was like I was mostly in on Smarty, but I wasn't going to like quit and work on it full time until someone else started paying me. So that was what I needed to get started. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that today.
How was that feeling when you got handed that check or when that deposit came through? Like what were the emotions during that period?
It's so funny to think back on now. I was in a fellowship, so I had to leave the fellowship early to go pursue this opportunity. And so I felt bad about that. So there was like a little bit of like guilt around it, but it was such a once in a lifetime opportunity. And it was what I'd been working towards for, it felt like years at that point, that I couldn't see myself doing anything but pursuing this full-fledged. And the person who I was working for at the fellowship, she knew this was my goal at the end of the fellowship. Like this is what I wanted at the end. So the fact that it came a
Right.
few months early wasn't like a surprise, but it was like unfortunate that it like the timing hadn't been a little bit better. But I remember that day where it was my first investor, Pear Ventures, by the way, and I love working with them. They're still like such great partners today. They called me and they were like, okay, the interview went great. We're excited. It was an accelerator. So they were like, I'm excited to invite you into this accelerator and we'll give you like the money in the next week. And I was like, okay, you have to be incorporated. You have to like do all of these things. And it just felt like a new chapter was opening.
Amazing. So that week money comes through. What was that first sort of focus? By the way, I'm in this WeWork. I have to move around or it's going to get dark in here.
Yeah.
So if I do this, I'm not reacting to, but what was the first sort of month of great money comes in, you get incorporated and you start setting up shop? What was your focus during that first early period?
So I was a solo founder. I was the only person. There was no other employees or co-founders or anything. I will say that first month was awful. It was really, really
Oh
existentially
no.
terrible because I had no idea what I was doing. And Pair was a great accelerator and they had great classes, but they were not giving me what I needed to like take my business from where I was to where I wanted to go. And they weren't
Right.
like telling me the advice I needed to hear. And maybe this was like several years ago, like maybe they didn't even know like how to like outline out like this is the action plan, or maybe I wasn't in the right place to hear it. Because it's funny now, like several years later, I hear certain pieces of advice and I'm like, yes, that's so true. But then I think back to myself and my younger self and I'm like, I heard that piece of advice before and I ignored it because I was like, that doesn't apply to me. So
Right.
I think you have to be in the right place at the right time, with the right mindset. And that first month I was lost. I had this money. I was working on this full time and I was like, okay, I have this early product. What am I supposed to do now? Like, how am I supposed to take it to what a business is supposed to be? And I really just didn't even understand the fundamentals.
Did you have any support during that period, like early advisors or anybody who got it during that first, say, 6 months, or that you sought out to sort of give you a little bit of a handhold of like, I see where you're headed. Let me, did you have anybody like that in that early period?
So Pair definitely like invested resources in me. They had advisors that I would talk to, but like a lot of that was focused around like figuring out the pitch and like figuring out like advice from like some of the other startup founders who had made it. But I think they were too far ahead for me to like truly understand like some of their advice and apply it to my own company. And then the cohort with me, they were all in different stages too. And so I was embarrassed really about like where I was and what my status was compared to them, even though I have no idea like how those businesses were doing. I just felt like I wasn't good enough. I had a lot of imposter syndrome at the time,
Yeah.
just around where I was at and where I needed to be. And I think the right thing to do would have been to seek out someone who was just like one step ahead of me, just who had just like figured out that like one step,
Yeah.
and was at the next step. But I wasn't even sure what that one step was. I know now, but I didn't then. And I like didn't reach out to people because I was embarrassed. I like didn't want to say like I have no idea what I'm doing and I need help. I need someone to like tell me like an execution plan or a roadmap or something. And that's the thing with founders, there are so many unknown unknowns. You are never going to get that roadmap. But
Right.
it would have been nice for someone to be like, hey, this is like what I would do if I were you. And one, not that many people are founders. So it's like, who is going to tell you that advice and like really have like the right advice to give?
Hmm.
And I think like my investors obviously were saying like the right things, like obviously finding customers that are willing to pay you for a problem. But I didn't understand like how that applied to what I was trying to build, which was like a consumer or productivity tool. And I kept building the solution because I thought, okay, if I spend time building the solution, making it good enough for me, then it'll be good enough for someone else. And that is definitely
Right.
not how you build a startup.
Yeah. So during that period, before we jump into sort of the early building and where you got to, is what would you say to you back during that confusing period now where you sort of felt embarrassed and weren't reaching out as much?
So I would say two main things. First, something that I've like really taken to heart over the years is everyone has imposter syndrome. And the only thing that's different between imposter syndrome and a growth mindset is you're telling yourself, I can't do this. But really, you should be telling yourself, I can't do this yet. I don't know how to do it
Yeah.
today, but I can learn and I can find the right resource. And that's the only thing anyone has control over is like moving forward and stepping ahead. And if you can't do something today, doesn't mean you can't do it forever. So I think that is something that I just really would have wanted to like instill in my younger self around like, it doesn't matter that you don't know how to do it today. Like the real win is putting yourself out there and trying to learn and being better tomorrow. So that's
Hmm.
definitely something that like came over time. And I really like learned to appreciate that over the startup journey because at certain points, like there's so many high highs and low lows that the only reward you really have is the knowledge that you gain or the curiosities that you fulfill. It's sometimes like these intangible things that end up having so much more value, but you can't really see that in that day to day, moment to moment progression. And the second thing that I would tell myself, which is like advice that I really like learned over the last, I think I learned it really this year, is if you're in that 0 to 1 stage, the only thing that matters is someone paying you. It doesn't matter that you have a product that works. In fact, you probably shouldn't even have a product. You probably, for that
Right.
100K in ARR, should just be manually delivering some sort of value and proving out that someone is willing to pay for the solution. And like, you can tell them it's automation. You could tell them and be honest, like, I'm doing this, but I'm trying to figure out what product to build. But the fact is, like, the only thing that matters is someone already paying you actively upfront to deliver some service. And that's how you know that service has real value to that customer, that it's a real pain point. Because if they're not willing to pay for it upfront and you're doing all of these user interviews and customer discovery, it doesn't mean anything. It's like, we read the mom test. I read the mom test back then, but I didn't really understand that there's a difference between user interviews and sales calls. And what you
Right.
would be doing from day one or day zero or day -1 is selling and finding a customer that's willing to pay you. And then you get that customer and you trial and error. Like, maybe the solution isn't the right thing. Maybe it's not what you want to work on. Maybe they're not paying you enough. Or maybe you haven't found something valuable enough to get paid for. But that way you're having real concrete data from day one around what is working, what isn't, and who is the customer that you're serving. And I was doing it completely the wrong way, just trying to build a product from the start.
I love that point of view. I imagine also, I'm interested to hear what you think if you look back to that period and now, when you think about this 0 to 1 period and when things are confusing, and also there is no specific roadmap. You can't ask anyone that they're like, here's the 5 steps that you specifically have to take. You sort of take parts and pieces from that, but the only way to do that is to trust your gut. I know it always feels a little bumper stickery, but I feel like in this period that I'm in the first 4 or 5 months, I've no other time in my life have I been so close to understanding what that means in terms of trusting your gut and understanding something fully and pushing towards something, even if you've got people going, I don't think that's a great idea. Do you feel like you've also gotten closer to that place over the past couple of years where you can really sort of listen and go, like, I can feel what the direction needs to be versus, trying to take all that input and early on feeling like, should I trust this or should I not?
Yeah, it's a really great question because I've often thought about it. Like, how much are you supposed to listen to your intuition and to your gut? And like, how do you know if you're doing the right thing or not? And how much should you be seeking other people's opinions, right? Because you shouldn't be like dependent on external validation. Then you're just going to really be at the whim of someone else's high highs and low lows. And the journey has
Right.
enough of that by itself. And so I think what I've really learned over time is that your gut gets stronger and smarter the more you expose yourself to uncertain situations. You have a lot of intuitive internal pattern recognition over time. And the more circumstances and new situations that you put yourself in, the more you're strengthening your gut. You're putting those reps in. But at the same time, your gut can be wrong sometimes, right? Like, you might not have been exposed to all of the things that it needs to be exposed to in order to have that right internal compass. And so it is important to put yourself out there in front of other people and vet your ideas and get validation and test for like other people's appetite. I think really over time, what I've learned is that it's a balance between everything. It's a balance between my own gut and my own intuition. It's a balance between like the attitudes I'm getting from other people. And often I think now, like, you have to go out and seek people who have the opposite opinion as you. You have to not take anything personally. You can't take someone agreeing with you as like really good news, and you can't take someone not agreeing with you as really bad news. You kind of have to take all of it, take what is constructive and what you can use to change or iterate or experiment. And then from there, once you have your gut and you have this data around like what other people think, then you have to do your own experiments, your own tests. And so you have to start validating your gut yourself.
Right. It's almost like you have experience as one of the inputs, and then you've got data, and then you've got inputs, and inputs could also be like magnifying the number of inputs. So my friend Trip thinks it's a great idea. That's one. Let me go get 100 or whatever. And so between that data and inputs and experience, if you take all 3 of those and internalize those. It's like let the computer do the processing, and get good at what that feels like. But you also have to, I think, to your point, make sure that you're exposing to a bunch of data and a bunch of different inputs from either people who've done it before or customers, and then take all of that to get better at it.
Exactly. But I think the really crucial step after that is like, once you have all of these hypotheses and you have all of these data points, you have to be running tests. You have to be experimenting yourself. You have to like come up with like 3 different hypotheses, one that you really agree with, one that maybe you don't agree with, something in the middle. And you have to just be testing to see what's actually working. And that like forces you to evaluate, okay, what are the metrics that will help me decide what is the right way forward?
Right. So we get to this place where like you start, and then within those the really confusing part, gut is maybe not strong yet, or you're feeling that imposter syndrome. What's the next sort of milestone that you remember where it starts to change or pivot a little bit, and you either get some traction, or you're starting to get better input, or you pivoted a little bit and you're starting to feel more confident about it?
Honestly, I would say that I didn't really like get more confidence in our direction until very, very recently. And so the years in between was a lot of meandering. And I feel like I was lucky to find such amazing investors coming out of that accelerator that were willing to invest in me and let me explore this idea and this space. And they came out of that peer accelerator and put in like a small pre-seed round. And so I used that to hire my first engineer. And then we started building a different version of the product. So we were originally a chatbot, then we switched to being a Chrome extension. We like competed with like a lot of other like scheduling tools that were out there in the market, because your calendar has the type of data around like how you live and work and what you do with your time. So I was like, that's where we're going to find the type of data we need for that next level product. But I was still spending so much time building the product instead of validating customers that would pay for it. And it was a different time in the investor space as well. Like there was less pressure to find revenue. I had investors that were like, revenue is really important, but I also had investors that were like, actually usage is more important. Get more users, just get people to like try the product. And so we had a good number of people coming in trying the product, but really it's obvious to me now in hindsight that we should have been trying to get them to convert to paid, because if they had been converting to paid, that would have told me, given me like the real data, like what matters, what doesn't. Because without that, we were just kind of building everything that we thought looked cool, that was shiny and fun, and that like every user would have like a feature request and we'd be like, yes, let's do that one. I'm definitely positive that I was getting advice that this was a bad way to do this, but then again, it's hard to know what advice to take seriously when you have no good compass of your own and no way of like evaluating what are your experiments, what are you trying to aim for. And so I kind of meandered along with this version of the product. We raised another round of capital actually with that product, because I was able to show like, hey, like we have a lot of users, we have a lot of people that have like tried the product and they like it, they use it. But I don't think any of those users we were a completely free service as well. So we didn't even have freemium, we were just free. And I think if we had tried to get those people to convert to paid, like none of them or very few of them would have. And I knew that then, so that's why I didn't try to like emphasize like, let's convert to premium. And I was still able to raise money, which was so amazing, because that was still before ChatGPT, but we were already using OpenAI's API at that time. And so I think the appetite had already been changing a little bit, and it was still an exciting space. I think I was still an exciting founder to be investing in, and we did have these usage metrics. And so I got another round of funding. Again, this was before the venture market switched again, because today the venture market is very, very focused on profitability. It's also post ChatGPT, so it is easier than ever to build prototypes that solve people's real problems that there are solutions for. Just being a GPT wrapper is enough to get you a lot of really amazing customers out there. And so the venture market has radically shifted between where it was when I raised my last round and where it is today. And I'm not trying to fundraise anytime soon, because I have a much better sense of like what are the metrics that actually matter.
No, that's so great. I think, with where you've gotten to, and it's amazing to hear that even over the years, it's sort of taken you to this place to get to. Is that do you feel like you've kind of hit your one where you're on sort of a flat, stable plateau and you can sort of think and grow from here? Or do you feel like you're getting close to it? Or where are you in that journey?
Yeah, I think we're finally getting closer to it. I wouldn't say that we're at one. I think what one would mean to me personally is that we are profitable and we are stable, and we could continue the business on just at that level without having to put more product research or more R&D or more hires or anything. Like, we could stay where we are and be profitable and be a business for the rest of time. Like, that would feel
Yeah.
more like one to me. But I feel like we're finally getting close to that. Like, we finally have real revenue coming in. We have a real software solution. We have a real service that we're providing to our clients. And more often than not, I get on a sales call and the client is excited to convert on the sales call. Like, we're starting to feel that energy. We're starting to see those results.
Nice.
And so it's very clear to me now that I'm here what this feels like and what it should have felt like back then. And I guess, like, to all the founders who are listening, who are in that like earlier stage, who are still trying to figure out how to get to 0 to 1, because I feel like I'm finally at a place where I can see one at the end of the tunnel, and now I just have to kind of execute to get there. I think what I needed to hear back then, and maybe this will be helpful to other founders out there today, is that, like, you have to focus on sales calls and you have to be selling something that you don't have, because that is the only thing that will tell you what is truly valuable to a customer. And you have to manually do things sometimes in order to, like, get to that next level. And I actually saw a really interesting post by Rob Snyder, who writes a lot about the PMF journey and the 0 to 1 journey, about how really until you have 100K in ARR, you probably shouldn't even be building a product. Like, you should be using that first 100K of ARR customers to help you define what is the product and how should it work. Because at
Right.
that point, you're just kind of throwing paper at a wall and seeing what sticks. And when you get to 100K ARR, you can finally be confident, like, hey, I found a client profile that's working. I found a problem space that is working. Now I can start thinking about, how do I scale this to get to 1 million ARR?
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Because also when you're starting out, even if you've got a great idea and you're like, I think this is going to work, I think that's going to work, and especially if, for founders that are bootstrapped, also, that are starting to put whatever capital they have, or even early angel funds into something, if it's too much towards a direction, without that feedback, even if I think what I'm also taking from what you're saying before that 100 ARR, even if some of that is manual, sort of magic behind the scenes, that you're delivering something, you're really testing against that, the potential for that service to be much easier, that a customer would part with their money, to be like, yes, please, I will
Exactly.
take that, and then sort of start to build the elegant machine behind that, once you've developed that sort of stronger trend toward a hypothesis that you think is going to work.
I think that's exactly right. And I wish I'd learned that earlier. And I also think, like, this works really well for bootstrap founders, because you can start selling and making real money before you even raise any funds. And it gives you an
Right.
even better leverage point when you go out to talk to investors, because you have real money behind your data.
Yeah. No, that's so great. So let's say your one is in sight. It is on the horizon. You're feeling a little more, you still have the productive jitters that keep things going, but you're feeling a little more confident about things. What do you imagine is just beyond the one, when you start to get this sort of growth curve, that the rocket ship is starting to take off? What do you envision for the company at that point?
If we had, like, a real hockey stick growth,
Mm-hmm.
I think the way that I think of the early stage, like the 0 to 1 journey, which is like really pre-seed, seed, is like you're just trying to find that customer profile and you're trying to find that product that serves them. And then you raise a series A because you've proven it out for a specific customer profile with a specific type of product and service, and like maybe bare minimum marketing. And really the series A is about expanding in that one market. It's about taking the new funds that you've raised and, like, scaling your go-to-market and having this flywheel already built out where hey, if I reach out in this way to this type of customer, 80% of the time or 20% of the time, this will convert into a sale. And so if I just put in more funding into the type of marketing messaging that we're already using, we're just going to 10x this or 15x this or whatever. And so that's what the Series A is really about. It's about taking something that's already working and just throwing throwing Kindle on the fire. And Series B is like, okay, it's working for this one industry, working for this one customer profile. Like, let's raise more money and like start looking at other customer profiles that are adjacent to this one that we can start to expand out to. And let's do that again for these other adjacent areas and adjacent customer profiles. And so that's how I see the progression of most early stage companies to that Series B stage. And I'm assuming that'll be where we can go as well, hopefully.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I can't wait to, I want to set up time because as I've looked through what Smarty does, and I've actually, I have team members that help me. We're a very distributed team, but I have team members help me. And I've gotten very good at Superhuman, and I've got like very good at my calendar, but it's also one of those things that sometimes it's just a deluge and you're just like, I just need a couple hours with headphones to try and like sort out this mess. So I'm really excited to try it, and I love what you're building because I think it's also got such great. I think as we've gotten remote, that you've also got so many different people. Founders, are a great example. Executives that are starting to try and figure out those ways that we're not doing the old way of trying to just like brute force get to inbox zero and to try and get a calendar that it has enough empty brain space that I can actually sort of think and create and strategize versus just like tackling fires. And I think it's only going to get worse also from a data overwhelm perspective of just so many things. So I think it's such a great solution that you all are building.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we do for our clients right now. So they're all like small business owners or solopreneurs or freelancers, and they have their own businesses and they've tried hiring like virtual assistants offshore to like manage, but they don't have that trust or the quality that they need necessarily. And they've tried these AI solutions in silos, and none of those solutions are handling all of the edge cases that they need, right? Because automation can only take you so far. And so what we're trying to do at Smarty is do this combination of human and AI employees all in one spot. And so for our clients, they deal with one customer success manager who kind of understands their needs, what they're trying to do with their business, and then they work to help them set up those systems and then delegate to a back-end team of our own automation tools that are already out there, and then our own team of virtual assistants that we've already vetted, that we've already managed the quality and trust around. And so kind of providing this like one-stop shop chief operational officer using AI and automation.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's so great. It's like magic. That's so much fun. Cool. So let's look into the future as the last question, as we sort of wrap this up. Is like, let's fast forward. You've gotten to Series A, you've gotten to Series B. You're now scaling into different verticals and different areas. I think back how different it is, and maybe it's just how my brain works, but I think back to like my dad, my granddad's era of the sort of standard, like get to 60 or 65 and retire and, find a quiet place to read a book or whatever it is. Can you see yourself, where do you see yourself in that sort of, 30, 40 years from now? And what do you see as your, I don't know, the place where you feel like you've accomplished, but also would you keep going? Would you sort of take a break, or like where do you see yourself in the future?
It's funny because if I think back to that like existential crisis that I had in business school, where I was like, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? Smarty was the answer back then, and it really hasn't changed. And in hindsight, it's really obvious to me that I used a practice that I didn't really know at the time. But like now I know like has like a real name to it, which is like the Japanese concept of ikigai, about finding something that you're passionate about, that you're skilled at, that is good for the community, and that allows you to like have an impact and make money. And I feel like even then I knew that Smarty was that for me. And I feel like having gone through that exercise, it's really had a standing power through time, because I still feel that way today. And I hope that in 30, 40 years, I'll still feel the same level of passion at that next stage, because the challenges change at every stage. And so I'm hoping that I'll still be this excited and this passionate about pursuing this vision.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on finding your ikigai.
Thank
That's
you.
amazing.
I appreciate it.
That's so great. Well, I can't wait to try out the product, and also to just watch the Smarty journey as well. So that's so great. And
Thank you
thanks
so much.
for the time today and
Yeah.
coming to chat about it.
I hope
Awesome.
this is like helpful to aspiring founders. I think 0 to 1 is the hardest stage. It really is. Like there's just so many unknown unknowns.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing. Well, it's good to see you again also.
Thank you so much. Bye.